Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So it is 11:21 on a Tuesday. I hope everyone is doing okay. This story, unfortunately, I can't necessarily keep this one long. I have two that I want to do, but I'm going to have some live videos when I get back this evening. I have a doctor's appointment. That being said, okay, just checking my sound. If you guys enjoy the content, please subscribe. And hit the notification bell. I know the notification bell doesn't work all that great. Apparently, people tell me all the time that they don't get the notifications. So they said they get it sometimes through their email, even though they don't get the notifications normally. Nevertheless, it's the best we get. So I do shows all the time. I do shows almost like every day, almost. I didn't do one yesterday, but I do them out of 7 days, probably 6, sometimes even 7. And it could be anywhere from usually between 5 and 6, but I gotta be honest, it could be all day, and it could even be 2, 3 in the morning. So please hit the notification bell, and if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe through Patreon and all that good stuff. They're attacking social media or independent media. Yeah, I have videos even on like Hillary Clinton get demonetized. It's amazing. That being said, unprecedented. Let's jump across the pond. Let's get to Brexit, because there's certain developments that has been taking place in Brexit. That's left my watchful eye. Boris Johnson. I have two stories, including Boris Johnson, but they're on different sides of the pond. One is him trying to protect the Iran deal on Fox News in this weird conversation, because it's skewed through this lens of the right. But in this case, Boris Johnson attacking his own prime minister. He is in the cabinet with that prime minister, and he is attacking that prime minister's story as crazy. Her plan for Brexit as being crazy. I love it. It's amazing. And believe it or not, without using the adjective crazy, Boris Johnson does kind of have a point from a logical standpoint of what the Brexiteers were supposed to give versus what Theresa May has ended up trying to sell. Let's use that term, because that's exactly what she's going to have to do to the other hard Brexiteers, because they're not going to be online with what she's talking about. So, just to snapshot this, because there's a little bit of water to throw before I get to the story itself, because I need to give context. I always have to give context to give a frame with which to understand this in an honest way. Brexit. What does Brexit mean? The fact is, nobody knew what Brexit mean. They just knew that they were leaving the EU, but nobody knew the details of what that actually meant. Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. Even after Brexit, Brexit means Brexit. The people were pissed off. I would imagine those people were like people in the United States. They were pissed off at the way things were going. They needed a way to express their rage and fury. The spoils weren't necessarily being distributed evenly, and they wanted to throw a brick through the modus operandi. And Lord, did they. Brexit. Britain's leaving the EU. Now they have to get into the details of what that actually means. What they hit their head on early on was Ireland. The hard border with Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the UK. It's part of Britain. Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is part of the EU. Now, Britain has just said it's leaving the EU, when Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, isn't going anywhere. The Republic of Ireland is still going to be part of the EU. How do you meld that? How do you square that circle? Under normal circumstances, you need a border between these things, because there are certain tariffs and trade regulations that must be attended to if you're going to have trade with the EU, if you're going to be part of the single union, single market. That runs afoul of the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was the agreement that settled the war, that essentially got rid of animosity between the UK, or let's say animosity, or at least let's say conflict between Ireland and Britain. Britain went with this white man's burden and wanted to do the world a favor and essentially rape the planet, owning 20% of the world. The rest of the world didn't necessarily like this, but Britain necessarily didn't care if they liked it, because Britain was getting off magnificently well. Ireland was one of the first countries to throw the yoke off of Britain, but this ended up with this kind of conflict going on for all these years. The Good Friday Agreement settled this conflict. A hard border would run afoul of that conflict. The EU has already said we're not going to do anything to jeopardize the Good Friday Agreement. And now you have a problem. If you're going to go with this idea of a hard Brexit, in fact, you have two problems. If you're going to go with this idea of a hard Brexit, you're going to need a customs or some kind of border. If you need a border, you're going to run afoul of the Good Friday Agreement. If you're not going to have a hard Brexit, then you're going to have some kind of regulatory parity with the EU. You've told these people you're going to leave. What are you going to do? How do you square that circle? Now, Jeremy Corbyn has said he wants a customs union as if it's this kind of magical solution. Theresa May has essentially skewed this, said no. But now I'll come back to the story. She has said someone yes, and she calls it a custom partnership. Boris Johnson is balking at this idea. The Brexiteers are balking at this idea. They went for a private vote within her cabinet, and they even voted her down on this idea. The business leaders comes out trying to save this idea or rehabilitate what Theresa May wants in this particular process, meaning a customs partnership. Now, let me explain what a customs partnership is, and then I'm going to explain Boris Johnson's. And honestly, Boris Johnson is the avatar of the pissed offness of the Brexiteers in this case. These people are pissed off. They voted for Brexit, and now they're getting something that's not quite a Brexit, and they feel they're being sold this kind of non-Brexit. You're still remaining with this kind of parity with Europe, and we voted to leave and control our own trade deals and trade board and our own regulations. And what you're trying to do now is not necessarily going to give us what we actually wanted. This is fascinating because there's somewhat of an open revolt in Theresa May's cabinet on this. You have people who are less inclined to the hard Brexit, but the majority of the people in her cabinet are hard Brexiteers. It's like 6-5 wanted a hard Brexit. Let's take a look at what I've been reading on this all morning. It's fascinating. It's fucking fascinating. So these are the two customs options that Theresa May has been talking about. This is BBC. The government's two customs options. A highly streamlined customs arrangement. This will minimize customs checks rather than get rid of them altogether by using new technologies and things like trusted trader schemes, which could allow companies to pay duties in bulk every month, every few months, rather than every time the goods cross a border. Essentially, we're paying a certain amount instead of doing this each time, meaning we're trying to minimize this idea of a hard border. This tries to solve this issue of the border between Northern Ireland. Problem with this is, this doesn't exist. They're talking about technologies that don't exist. He's saying we can have this conceptual technology at some point that comes up and have these. It doesn't exist. You've had people look at this as you can't do this. Now, whether they can do this or not is kind of besides the point. They can't do it now, and they can't necessarily finish this before the 2020 deadline. So let's keep going at our other option. This is kind of why Theresa May has been brought to this position, I would say, kicking and screaming. It's not that she loved this. It's, what do you do? You're supposed to leave that place, I think, by like 2020. What are options? What's his name want? Even though he's calling her scheme crazy, your scheme is just as crazy, seeing as your scheme doesn't really actually exist. Hers does, regardless of how unworkable it is. A customs partnership. This will remove the need for few customs checks. This will remove the need for new customs checks at the border. The UK will collect tariffs set by the EU Customs Union on goods coming into the UK on behalf of the EU. If those goods didn't leave the UK and UK tariffs on them were lower, companies could then claim back the difference. Hope that makes sense. This will remove the need for new customs checks at the border. The UK will collect tariffs set by the EU Customs Union on goods coming into the UK on behalf of the EU. If those goods didn't leave the UK and the UK tariffs on them were lower, companies could then claim back the difference. All right. Now, Boris Johnson said this plan was crazy. Boris Johnson has launched an unprecedented attack on the Prime Minister's preferred option for post-Brexit EU customs partnership, calling the proposed system crazy and saying it would not give Britain control of trade policy. On a visit to Washington, the Foreign Secretary said a customs partnership, one of the two options considered by the Cabinet BREXIT subcommittee, would be unacceptable. Downing Street said on Tuesday afternoon that the Prime Minister retained full confidence in Johnson, but in remarks that could be interpreted as a rebuke, her official spokesman pointed out that the entire Cabinet has signed up to her Mansion's House speech in which she settled her plans. While Number 10 defended the Business Secretary Greg Clark's intervention at the weekend as entirely in keeping with the government's policy, May's spokesman also refused to be drawn into whether the same was true of Johnson's comments. I want to get into Johnson's comments. Right here. All right. The foreign minister comments gave the strongest signal yet that he might be prepared to resign should Theresa May push ahead with a partnership option under which the UK would collect EU import tariffs on behalf of Brussels. The method would solve, this would be a logistical nightmare, by the way, but it would solve the Irish border thing. The method would solve the problem of the Irish border, but Brexiteers regard it as an untested and impractical opening the door to remaining in a customs union with Brussels. Sources close to Johnson insisted he did not regard the customs union as a resigning matter, pointing out that there were members of the cabinet who did not agree with Brexit who stayed on. In an interview that put the backstage cabinet war on the open, Johnson told the Daily Mail that methods were totally untried and would make it very, very difficult to do free trade deals. If you have a new customs partnership, you have a crazy system whereby you end up collecting the tariffs on behalf of the EU at the UK frontier. He said, if the EU decides to impose punitive tariffs on something UK wants to bring in cheaply, there's nothing you can do. He's making the point that, look, our goal in this was to get out of the EU. I mean, to get out of the EU. We want control over our own trade deals. You've put us in the position of having to collect tariffs on goods that are coming in that are supposed to be going to the EU. It's like, what if there's something that we want for Britain? We want. The EU, Brussels, puts a tariff on a particular item. Are they now controlling our trade deals? Do we also need to put this tariff on this particular item at this level? Meaning, do we need to put a punitive tariff on an item that we ourselves want? You're aligning our trade policy with Brussels in this kind of backhand way. You're kind of scooting us away from the original point of our Brexit goals, or Brexiteer goals anyway. Let's keep going. This is a good point. If your disposition is we want to leave and we want full control of our borders, what he's saying is a good point. If you have new customs partnership, you have a crazy system whereby you end up collecting the tariffs on behalf of the EU at the UK frontier, he said. If the EU decides to impose punitive tariffs on something the UK wants to bring in cheaply, there's nothing you can do. Pro-leave cabinet ministers, including Johnson, preferred an alternative maximum facilitation or max-fact proposal, which relies on technology to keep the border checks to a minimum. Mind you, he's calling her proposal crazy and unworkable and untested. What he's saying doesn't even exist. Downing Street has insisted both options remain on the table, though Brexiteers have privately described the customs partnership as a dead parrot after their forceful objections at last week's meeting. Johnson suggested the partnership option, also known as the hybrid model, will not deliver on the results of the referendum. That's not taking back control of your trade policy. It's not taking back control of your laws. It's not taking back control of your borders. And it's actually not taking back control of your money either, because tariffs will get paid centrally back to Brussels, he said. Johnson said the model would also force the UK into close regulatory alignment with Europe. It only solves the Northern Ireland border question if you force companies to prove that an imported tariff-reduced good has been consumed in the UK, and if you insist on complete regulatory alignment with the EU rulebook, he said. Otherwise, if Britain chooses to vary its laws in any way on all goods or agri-goods, then logically, you would need checks at the border. When I read this, I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, how does that solve the issue with the goods themselves? Like, Boris Johnson is somewhat right on this. If the UK wanted to change its laws, how do you change your laws when those laws need to be in somewhat of alignment with Brussels if you want to stay in part of the Union? He's not wrong on this, at least not completely. What I think he's wrong on is the understanding of Brexit. Nobody knew what Brexit meant. You can say we're leaving the EU, but what does that mean? So his thing of, this is not delivering what people want. It depends on the person. There's some people who didn't necessarily want to leave. There's some people who said, fine, I didn't want to leave. The country voted. Let's get on with it. This nice British phrase, get on with it. Let's get on with it. But by the same token, they don't necessarily want to do anything that would adversely affect their own standing or companies. At the very least, companies from the standpoint of them keeping their jobs or them being able to get their goods or sell their goods. They don't want Britain to be damaged by the leave. I guess that's their point. Boris Johnson is heavy on this Brexiteer thing, meaning leaving thing. But he's less concerned, or at the very least he seems less concerned, or not fully concerned. I have to be honest, I am somewhat concerned on the well-being of Britain on this. Like, when this first took place, I was like, okay, open-minded, let's see what takes place. They're trying to extricate themselves from the EU, and they're trying to do it within the course of a few years. Theresa May is at the helm. The government is in chaos. You have some people who are ideologically bent on this idea of hard Brexit. Theresa May is trying to find this middle ground between the two and trying to pull the Brexiteers into it. I would make the point that people don't necessarily know fully what Brexit means. And because they don't necessarily know what fully Brexit means, Theresa May is not necessarily wrong for coming a few inches less than what Boris Johnson wants. I guess that's the point I'm getting at. The definition of Brexit is not necessarily clearly defined. Boris Johnson saying that's not taking back control of your trade. The partnership, also known as, does not deliver on the results of the referendum. I'm making the point that no one fully, completely understood what the referendum even meant. So to say that what they're talking about doesn't necessarily deliver on the referendum, that's up for debate. That's somewhat subjective. It doesn't deliver on it for him because he was in this kind of hard Brexit camp. Other people who weren't necessarily in this hard Brexit camp but did think they needed more control over their regulatory authority, solves their issue. Question becomes, can they pull this off? And this is somewhat of a paperwork nightmare. Johnson said the model would also force the UK into close regulatory alignment with Europe. It only solves the Northern Ireland border question if you force companies to prove that an imported tariff-reduced goods that has been consumed in the UK, and if you insist on complete regulatory alignment with the EU rulebook. Now that part he's right about. You still have to be in regulatory alignment, otherwise they're not going to accept the product in your... what I mean is, if you want to be part of the EU, you're going to have to play by their trade deals. You can't pick and choose. It's not a la carte. If you want to abide, or if you want to get within the European Union, trade union, you have to abide by their rules. He's making a point. This is not Brexit. This does not get us out of this. Theresa May is trying to work the middle ground. He thinks this is unworkable, and let's be honest, though, his plan is also somewhat unworkable. Otherwise, if Britain chooses to vary its law in any way on goods or agri-goods, then logically you will need the checks at the border. Clark defended the model on Sunday, setting out how devastating customs checks will be for major employers such as car industry. Frictionless trade was something that we've made public commitment to, and we need to make sure that we get it right. And by the way, May, along with the Chancellor Philip Hammond and the Northern Ireland Secretary Karen Bradley and the Business Secretary Greg Clark, said they prefer the partnership option. I bet they do. Johnson said a model such as a custom partnership would also be a disincentive for countries such as the United States in negotiating future trade deals agreements. That's not what Americans want to see. What they want to see, like all our friends, is a confident free trading Britain able to do its own deals, he said. You can't do that if you remain locked in a lunar pole of Brussels. The tractor beam of Brussels. He's not wrong. Not fully. It all depends on what you mean by Brexit. There was something else that I found that was fascinating on this. Right here. And I think this is why Theresa May tweaked her position on this from hard Brexit. Sources close to Business Secretary Greg Clark confirmed company leaders have warned him that business investments are more likely to go to other countries if Britain fails to achieve a frictionless trade deal with the EU, meaning factories would close. Senior MP said discussions on all sides had made clear that Commons would not support a hard Brexit deal that abandoned Britain's current trade advantages. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve said Brexiteers' proposals were dangerous and unworkable. Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer said Labour would not settle for less than a deal that provided all advantages of being in a customs union. Fact is, it's possible that May could not get past a hard Brexit deal. The reason why she may be becoming less of a hard Brexiteer is because she probably can't get it through Commons, and business leaders have come to her telling her, stop what you're doing. You're going to hurt our interests. Stop what you're doing. Like all conservatives, they are extraordinarily responsive to business interests, and if that business interest is telling her to stop, she may be stopping. Beyond that, I think it's also this thing of Can you even get it through comments? The House of Lords has rebuked her like 2 or 3 times. They've given her a bloody nose on this very specific point. And so now she's in a situation of Labor's not going to back me. There's some people in my backbench that are not going to back me. Business leaders are telling me to stop and that they're flipping out. They're telling me that they may even move their companies into other countries. What am I to do? What am I to do? So, Balthazar, all the monetary policies of the EU going to single currency promotes austerity, and its terrible trades, borders, and people movement were good. Balthazar, so not necessarily bad for Britain, but mixed bag. The only thing that's needed to leave the UK, Tories. That, Balthazar, I agree with. The only thing that needs to leave the UK are the Tories. Look, Boris Johnson is not completely wrong on this, depending on your disposition. If you're in the position of, I want a hard Brexit, then what Boris Johnson says makes sense. We're still going to have to be in regulatory alignment with the EU if we really, under this model, we're still in regulatory alignment with the EU. If the EU pulls a chain, we have to jump. That's not necessarily taking back control of our trade deals. He's not fully wrong. The question becomes, what do you do about Northern Ireland? He seems to completely miss this point. And the idea that he has about this kind of hybrid, this technology and all this other stuff. I've read experts saying this is nonsense. Or at the very least, it's nonsense in a time span that they need to get this done. Both sides, to some degree, are right. It is nonsense in the time frame that it is to get this done, but the same token, Theresa May is kind of dragging the Brexiteers into something that they didn't necessarily want. Stay tuned. I'll put all the articles at the bottom. All right, guys. I had to keep this one quick, and I know this 21 minutes is not necessarily as quick as I want it, but it's a lot to cover. Alrighty, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys. The articles at the bottom.